I haven't seen those dogs. The one across the road hasn't been over, so today's exciting.
Commiserating about our animal care. And we're part of the program where we have been there for a year.
Yeah, there were actual photographs in it.
The other one was that way too.
No, he opened it.
Here. There you go.
Look at the haircuts on these people.
It's the 60s, isn't
Probably
it?
recognize some of these
70s?
people.
These were the peppers. We were at their house.
Yeah, identify yourself.
So they built us up, so that was actually good ownership.
Okay. We'll follow this side.
So here I am. Here you are.
You know, I was asking Fury about Bruce's.
Last night it was really big.
My son got married kind of hard to believe.
At some point that sale was overall.
Like I always had in my head,
introduce someone who wants to make a few remarks. This is a fellow who used to be the head of the biology department, but has recently made a dramatic switch and is now the Dean of Engineering for Washington University. I'd like to introduce you to Ralph McConnell.
Thank you, Gil. I didn't think I'd get introduced with that one. Because people are going to say, what do you know about engineering? And my favorite comment in response to that is I have 80 engineers. So they know about engineering. So I just have to decide who to pick. I want to say just a couple of words. First, this turnout's been just phenomenal. And I knew a little bit about this when Jerry came to me, I don't know, maybe a couple of years ago, about this display that was down here in the medical school, the Link display. And you know my background, so I said, so Jerry, what's Link? And so then I got an introduction to that, like I'm getting lots of introductions to parts of engineering. But I got a feeling for how important this was to Jerry and the group, Wes and Charlie, because when they moved that Link display from medical school down to the engineering school, Jerry sat in a chair and watched them put it up. There was no doubt that it had to be correct, and nothing was to be destroyed or ruined. So there was I saw this love relationship there, and then I found out with another event of how close all of you were. So I think I recognize how important all of this is to all of you. I just finished a whole day, and there's some more later tonight, so that's why I can't stay for dinner, of another alumni group that's this meeting. In the last 15 or 20 years, our Division of Biology and Biomedical Sciences has a number of programs that go across many departments. And this division actually started 45 years ago. Primarily because of the direction of then Chancellor Bill Danforth. And we took a real look at one of the programs, the plant biology program, and we asked alums to come back. And many of these alums came back and they're working in industry and so forth, and we said, what is it that you wish you would have had when you were here as a graduate student? And we wanted to sort of get some feedback, and we had present students there, and so that went on all day today. But I've been to most of my college reunions. I think these kinds of relationships that you have, especially around research and around these kinds of monumental discoveries and importance, I think is really tremendous. And when I heard about this group and now the 100 plus that are here tonight, I just want to thank you all for coming, and thank you all for keeping in touch with one another. And you never know when you see each other that this is the last time or the first time in a long time. So whatever that is, it's important to get together, and I can't thank you enough for doing that. One more thing that I want to mention, because one of the events that are happening all around the world today are the convergence of fields, and I think that biology is really an example of how that field and that of engineering, and especially computer science, are interfacing now, and they're converging in lots of ways. And I talked about this at the undergraduate recognition ceremony of the class that just graduated. And I mentioned this about Jerry. I talked about Jerry at this graduation. And what I said was, at graduations, by the way, I've given a couple of these, and having been in the audience a few times, I just have two requirements for it. One is it has to be less than 15 minutes. And the other requirement is you have to leave a message. It's probably not more than 6 or 7 words. You may not remember who talked at the thing, but if it was short and there was a quick message, you had a hope that they would remember it, right? So the hope was, or rather the message was 2 words: reach out, do something that matters. Okay? And the example I gave was Jerry. Jerry reached out in computer science in the early 70s. He reached out and applied what he did to the medical school, medical problems, medical research. And we recently just recognized the build-out of the biomedical engineering department. Of about 15 years that Frank Yin came from Johns Hopkins and built this department. But prior to that, decades before that, Jerry reached out, and that reaching out made a difference. And so that was an example I made at graduation, and I think that all of you in this room had something to do with that particular, do something that matters. And I think that it's really important to recognize that and to celebrate it. And so I welcome all of you, and from the engineering school, and I think you saw some of the new buildings. When you come back for your 75th, you will see a whole new campus down there. 2 new buildings will probably be up way before that, at least I hope so. One will be the home of computer science, and the other one will be the home of mechanical engineering. The 3 other departments are already down there, and some of you walk through those buildings. So those are my only comments. I wish I could stay longer and meet more of you, but I have a good feeling for what this group is and what you've done. And the only one I know closely here is Jerry, and I want to congratulate him and give him the recognition that comes with this whole group. So thank you all for coming, and enjoy and celebrate.
My wife thought it was.
It's raspberry vinaigrette.
Thank you, Craig. It's adventurous,
You got any clues?
Not too sweet. Yeah. No, not real sweet. Eager to find out. Where are you?
No cocktail or no cocktail?
That project became available. And I used that.
Yeah, this is just fine New England.
Yeah.
Healthy. Did that fail last December? We're giving a gift certificate of
My name's Gil Yost. I'm lucky to be the chairman of radiology at the Mallinckrodt Institute. It's the best job in the world. I know many of you, but some of you I don't know. I'd like to just tell you, before we start with the rest of the program, how I wound up in St. Louis. I was in medical school, started in 1964, doing some neurophysiology, looking at evoked potentials, and found myself needing computers to do that. And I got particularly interested in computers. I remember saying to Peggy, this sounds like a good combination, medicine, computers, there's a lot of opportunity there. Spent a couple of years at NIH with the PDP-12 doing neurophysiology. The PDP-12, as you remember, was became a descendant of the Link 8. And it was pretty exciting stuff. I want to tell you that a guy on the East Coast interested in medical applications of the computers, it was absolutely clear that the center of activity for that sort of stuff wasn't at Harvard, it wasn't at Stanford or Berkeley, it was in St. Louis. And it was because of BCL and CSL. This was the hub. And so it came time to apply for a radiology residency. My family was on the East Coast. I'd gone to college and medical school on the East Coast. And I applied for residencies up and down the East Coast. Somebody told me I ought to take a look at a place in St. Louis. Thought it was maybe one of the best programs. And so I did come out here. Ron Evans, who was a young, new chairman of the department, was wise enough to set up an interview with Jerry Cox. And Jerry took me around BCL. He took me over to meet Charlie Molnar. That was a pretty exciting thing. And even though I really felt I should stay on the East Coast, it was probably that tour that Jerry gave me that tipped the balance, and I decided to come out here for my residency. But I told Peggy it was just going to be for 3 years, and then I was going to go back to the East Coast where I knew there was indoor plumbing and running water. But you know, I got out here and there was exciting stuff going on. Computer collection of data from a gamma camera, nuclear medicine stuff, first in the world. Radiation treatment planning, a whole ton of people interested in computers in medicine. You know, the CT scanner came along. That was a terrific development. In those days, it took almost 8 minutes to develop a single slice that was 80 by 80. And we captured the images on Polaroid film with a little squeegee that you'd use to preserve it, because that was the only way to capture an image. But golly, you could see the cerebral ventricles. And there was talk about building a PET scanner. Pretty exciting stuff. And then Ron Evans decided to turn the 12th floor of the Institute, which was then a shell space, into a computer facility. And he hired Rex Hill and set out to do computer stuff in radiology. Well, you know, when the 3 years were up, how could I leave? And so it was just a great deal of fun being at this place with BCL and CSL across the street. Rex and I bought the first computer, PDP-11, with 2 40 megabyte disk drives. I remember there was a cartridge drive, an RK05, that would store 1.5 megabytes. But golly, you know, it was just great fun, Rex, wasn't it, to do things that that never had been done before. Rex, Jim Blaine, Jerry, and I remember getting together in Jerry's kitchen on one Thanksgiving morning to write our paper for the first PACS, is what we refer to for image distribution, picture archiving and communication systems. And the first PACS meeting was in Newport Beach. And we put together a paper and Jerry delivered it. The main point was the conclusion that Ethernet, which was supposed to be 10 megabits per second, really closer to 3, that wasn't going to be adequate enough to handle modern or future electronic radiology departments. And so 30 years later, I'm responsible for a department with over 850,000 exams per year, many of those exams having thousands of images, and they're all electronic. We don't have a single piece of film. So it's just thrilling to look back at where we started and it all started at BCL, and where we've come in that short period of time. Jerry, I do want to say, I really appreciate your giving me that tour. If that hadn't have happened, I think I may have wound up somewhere else, and this great career would have taken an entirely different course. So thank you very much. So the program this evening is going to be some remarks of some of the old timers who were there in the beginning. And Jerry had asked for some people to volunteer. So the first person that's going to speak to us was a doctoral student of Jerry's. He was tasked with the project of creating the data master, which was referred to this morning, Maynard Ingebretson. And Maynard, when you were talking about that this morning, Jerry mentioned quietly something about chicken bones, and I didn't know what that meant. Maybe you could fill us in on how the chicken bones related to the data master. Maynard?
All right, the name of my talk is Twes Chakub. Twes Chakub. I'm not as good as Jerry is in acronyms. It stands for two students, Jerry Cox and Biomedical Computer Lab. The two students are Don Glazier and me. We were among Jerry's first graduate students at BCL. Before that, we shared an office in the basement of CID where we developed, among other things, the HAVA. Don doesn't travel much now, so he asked me to give his part of the talk, and he sends his greetings and best wishes to all of us here. Don lives in Texas. Don met Jerry for the first time in the spring of 1956 when he took Jerry's junior level electronics course, and again later in the fall when he took Jerry's acoustics course. Don doesn't remember how these encounters grew into a job at CID, but they did. During his time at CID, Don discovered that he and Jerry, along with several others, shared a passion for ping pong. This passion grew into a lively competition for the top spot on a ranking ladder. During one of the few pauses in this competition, Jerry conceived of the design of an A to D converter that ultimately became the subject of Don's master's thesis. This was the first of many JRC ideas that led to advances in Don's knowledge and his career. One such idea was to pursue fetal EKG research, which became the topic of Don's doctoral research. Don collaborated on this research with Bear, a pediatric cardiologist, and Wolf, an obstetrician. This was typical of collaborations between engineering and medicine at BCL. Later, Jerry introduced Don to Michael DeBakey, who ultimately hired Don to build a computerized post-surgical monitoring system. The system was modeled after a CCU system built at Barnes Hospital by Floyd Nolly, another of Jerry's grad students. Don worked with DeBakey at Baylor College of Medicine for nearly 40 years before retiring. So that's Don's story. I graduated from the University of Minnesota and worked a year at McDonnell Aircraft before applying to graduate school at Washington University. I met Jerry in 1960 when I interviewed with him at CID for a research assistantship. The early 60s was an exciting time for Marianne and me. I got the research assistantship at CID. I was accepted into graduate school. Jerry Cox became my advisor, and we moved into cheap prefab housing on campus with our two kids, one more on the way. Jerry arranged for me to take medical school classes as part of my double E graduate study. I think maybe I can claim to be the first biomedical engineer at WashU. It was pretty interesting learning all of this about how the body worked and how the brain and sensory systems work. My master's research was to design and build a special purpose computer for hearing research. The computer which Jerry named the HAVOC, now that's a better acronym, sampled input signals and calculated various histograms, averages, and ogives. I don't know if we ever used the ogive, but it made the acronym better, right?
People always ask.
Don Glacier and I built 4 laboratory versions of the HAVOC. One was for Hallowell Davis at CID to study the use of auditory evoked responses as a hearing screening test for infants. In the summer of 1963, Jerry arranged for me to go to Boston to work with the Link Group for a month. He included Marianne and the 3 kids, which was very thoughtful. We stayed in an apartment near Harvard Square. Very exciting. Marianne and the kids visited museums and local attractions. I helped assemble and debug links. We had a great time and ended up staying 6 weeks. I have many fond memories of working at BCL. I remember an early project to interface the CalComp digital plotter to the link and to write a package of plotting subroutines for it. To test it, I plotted a cochlear traveling wave, which was published in a CalComp newsletter. That was my first publication on this. I remember how Jim Satterfield, this is a new topic, I remember how Jim Satterfield, a psychiatrist who had one of the HAVOCs, would come into my office and lay on my couch and tell me of his new ideas for using HAVOC. I think the couch came when we moved into the prefabs. There wasn't room for it, so. I remember working with Bruce Spinner to demonstrate that we could store sounds in random fashion on a magnetic disc, play them back with high fidelity. I remember how great it sounded when we played Meredith Wilson's 76 trombones through the system during a demonstration to visitors. I remember working on the Data Master. But after much effort, we were unable to achieve a reasonable level of reliability. Some of you may remember that I even tried black magic. Story goes, I was on vacation and I just happened to have some dried chicken bones in my lunchbox, or in my toolbox. And I was on vacation and people at the lab were looking for something to fix the Data Master. And found my chicken bones, and I haven't heard the end of it. I also remember moving a link to the Chase Park Plaza for a skit. I played the role of one of several stagehands who were trying to adjust the piano bench the right height for the maestro. Mike McDonald in Tux and Tails was the maestro. I remember participating in a trip to Chicago. I don't remember the business purpose, but I do remember that we had time to visit the second city. So here we are 50 years later, reminiscing about BCL. Marianne reminds me that we moved to St. Louis temporarily 55 years ago. Because of the people we met at CID, BCL, CSL, and WashU, we have made it our home.
The next speakers, and there are 2 of them, will do a tag team demonstration here. One is J. Walter Woodbury, the first biophysicist hired by the University of Washington. And he participated in the link evaluation program. He was one of the dozen first link computers. And he'll be accompanied by his son Dixon, who I learned on the internet this afternoon is a professor of physiology and developmental biology at BYU. as I was going through that website, there was something called Rate My Professor. And apparently Dixon teaches a course, Bio 362, and one of the students commented, Professor Woodbury was great. He has cheesy jokes, but he is a really good teacher. So if you want to work a few cheesy jokes into your presentation, Dixon, that would be great.
Well, he took my first line, which is that as far as I know, I'm the only link recipient here. And because of that, I want to thank all of you who made the link possible for your great efforts. It changed my life, and it changed everybody else's life for the better. Okay, I was a successful applicant for the link evaluation program and spent the month of August 1963 in Cambridge, bringing my family in tow. Thus I became linked to the link. At the time, I was a professor of physiology and biophysics at the University of Washington. That month changed my behavior dramatically and that of our faculty and students. I made the link readily available to all the students and faculty, and thus brought them into the computer age. The link proved enormously popular, and for years I taught a course in which each student was required to write a short utility program. Today these are called apps. Over a 7-year period, at least 40 students and a few faculty made frequent use of the link in addition to my frequent use of it. One of my graduate students used the link to acquire data for his thesis and spent about 1,000 hours, mostly at night, over a 3-month period. My son Dixon will now continue the presentation. He started on the link at age 6 and literally grew up linking. And Dixon moved to Utah in 2001. We started spending a day or two a month trying to get the link working. And believe it or not, we have largely succeeded in this endeavor. And in the process, we have become more closely linked.
All right, well, those cheesy jokes are mostly in the form of limericks, and I inherited that from my father, as I did a love for computers and physiology. So we'll start out with one. We meet now in sunny St. Lou, because to the link we are true. Today it is 50, a computer so nifty, this color should be named Link Blue. So here's a picture back at MIT at the Link assembly plant. There's my father standing outside in the building. And here he is building his particular link that August 1963. As Wes said, he was distinguished by the fact that he could see over the link. Here, then, a year later, a couple of years later, 2 years later, yeah, they had the comic. This is the review of the link, and this was the program cover. And you can see the link there actually displaying the title, Convocation on the Mississippi, where the evaluators came and reviewed the progress. And at that meeting, my father wrote this resolution, which is in legalese. I'll see if I can read it for you here. There he has a picture of him reading it at that time, in 1965. It applies to good people here also. Whereas the good people of CRL and CBO have labored long, fruitful, cheerful, and unstintingly, and even nights to provide functioning links to sundry physiologists, psychologists, and gadgeteers. And whereas the aforesaid good people have carried on these labors with stout hearts, a stiff upper lip, and with a smile in the face of insuperable obstacles, obstinate link-lunks, and even technical difficulties. And whereas they have leaped these obstacles, soothed the savage brass, and solved technical difficulties with talent, tact, and technique, be it, therefore, solemnly resolved that the undersigned link-lunks wish to hereby express their deep thanks and appreciation to these aforementioned good people of CRL, not only for their perseverance, tact, and talent, for their hard work in a cause in which they believed, for their unfailing good humor and good sense, but also for supplying the undersigned with one of the most challenging, interesting, and educational experiences of their lives by introducing them to an exciting and powerful new experimental tool and technique and opening up a new world of ideas, possibilities, and expectations. With a rousing thanks and well done, we attach our signatures and appreciation this 18th day of March 1965, and that's signed by the evaluation committee of my father, or the link recipients, the link recipients there. Woodbury and Gordon were the two from the University of Washington, and there's others there too. So that was 1965. This was some recipients there. I think we can recognize some people here from the convention. So here is the link that we had was expanded, added additional memory, and that let us make the Space War, Star Wars program a little bit fancier there. It kept score now, for example. Still push EOL to restart, though. That was always built in. Here you can see two people playing with two monitors here, Space War. That link set up in our basement. This is just last year we took this picture. So there's the link running Space War, the two spaceships there, going away battling at each other with little foot pedals to fire the torpedoes. So we had this, the Biophysical Society meetings were held in Salt Lake City in 2006. And so we got the link on exhibit there. And this was the sign that was on the link during that exhibit. It worked well enough. It still had some problems at this point, but it worked in the new memory. The older memory was failing at this point. And you can see here, this is the 16K of memory that got added up on top of it. That made it so you couldn't look over the link anymore. And then there were additional registers that were added here as an additional panel because we needed 16 bits to address that memory. And then also two floppy disk drives. These are the 8-inch floppy disk drives that were added to the link that you can see right here, dual floppy disk drives. Here is again the picture that we took it to the exhibit where we had labels on the various parts. And here you can see again that panel with the extra registers on it. You can also see down here added extra bits right here so that we could address it here. And so the link had some extra holes drilled in it. That was hard to do. And now with the expanded link, this is where I came in as a software programmer. I wrote a compiler, and this was based off of BASIC. And so now the link actually had a compiler running in that 18K of memory it had now. And this is some code that was written and generated a bunch of data here that can now do some number crunching. And this is using one of those XY plotters that I mentioned earlier that was hooked up to the link. And then the data was plotted out on these to generate these sort of graphs. These were on that kind of waxy clear paper. I brought them here too. So we've got these original charts that were plotted by the link. This particular one was modeling potassium channel gating, and the gate of a potassium channel. And here's a picture of both of us down in the basement where the link is, in my father's basement. I'm happy with some of the progress we've recently made at this particular time. It's a link waveform back there, clocking pulse. And finally, to end, the rest of our limericks. The link was invented by Wes, and getting job done was a stress. In an eyelid blink, he designed the link and made it a whopping success. We've all gathered here from afar and salute now our Charlie Molnar. A jocular fellow, laid back and mellow, he was the link's troubleshoot star. Mary Allen invented lap 4, with tight-knit assembler did score. Since Mary A. Wilkes, every link word milks, she'll go down in coding folklore. If there is a weakest link in the link, if in armor there might be a chink, we then set our sights on adding more bytes, and the tape churn of lap 4 did shrink. In the link, every word has 12 bits. To learn it would drive some to fits. Instead, we learned octal, so now we can talk till the link finally goes on the fritz.
They were cheesy.
The student evaluations are actually correct, you're saying?
The next speaker is a fellow radiologist who has a very successful practice in California. It's been a long time since I've seen him last. Bill Glenn.
Just want to echo what Dr. Yost started out with in the hub comment, because I first learned of BCL in the summer of 1966, taking a software course that I did not understand at the Mayo Clinic. And at the end of that, I went to the instructor and said, I didn't understand a word you said all summer, but I know I'm interested in this computer medicine stuff. And he said, where do you go to medical school? And when I told him, he just backed up. And he said, Wesley Clark, Charles Molnar, Jerry Cox. Young man, you just hit the jackpot. And he said, go look up Dr. Cox in your second year. So when I wandered in the front door of BCL in 1967, it was not a minor detour for my career. It was a total game changer. And I'm enormously grateful to all of you for making my medical school journey very different and vastly better. My takeaway from BCL was exactly what Dr. Thomas said this morning. It was the environment and the incredible leadership. And it gave me confidence, or a BCL swagger. My BCL world was 2 radiation therapy projects and a cardiac cath lab project. The radiation therapy project first was rho theta, which was the isodose chart thing, and I had to use the rho theta to trace them and transpose them into a data grid on the strip charts that Dave Bridger talked about this morning. I did so much rho theta time that I became the local rho theta Rambo. And several years later, first year resident, second month, Mass General Hospital chest desk, the chest guy brought in his research assistant and showed us how to do thoracic gas volumes from PA and lateral chest films. Took 40 minutes, planimeters, measurements. And when it came my time to read cases off the monitor, sorry, the film changer, he said, Glenn, you're not paying attention. And I just shook my head and I said, you're right, Dr. Green, I'm not paying attention. I'm just feeling sorry for that poor guy that you brought in here. And you mean you don't believe in thoracic gas volume? And I said, sir, I only know so far where the drinking fountain and the bathrooms are. I am only telling you that the way he's doing it makes no sense. And so he said, that's fairly aggressive for a first-year resident. Would you like to make a bet and predict a better time? And I said, I'll make a bet. And so I whipped out a quarter and I smacked it down. And he said, and so what's your predicted time? And I said, I can do that in 60 seconds. And he said, that's absolutely ridiculous. 40 minutes to 60 seconds? And I said, do you want to take my bet, or do you want me to take it back and put it? No, I'm going to take your bet because that's the only way you are going to disprove your own theory. So 2 or 3 months later, I had an approved first-year resident presentation at the RSNA with him as a co-author. But I lost my 25 cents because the best I could do was 74 seconds and the average was 90 seconds. My second project was the tub water tank project, which was the great big lucite thing on a hydraulic roll-around thing for measuring the shaped beams that Dr. Waltz talked about this morning. I got the privilege of writing the, follow the isodose lines and trace them out. And one day, 2 notches down from Bill Burth's office on the right side, I walked into Andy Bodicki's office and I said, Andy, we've got to rename this tub project. To what? And I said, Gorth. And he said, what does that mean? I said, I have no idea what that means. I said, it's just so big and so ugly that I'm going to call it Gorth from now on. 2 days later, I think that Dr. Cox has everybody reverse engineering acronyms. It was ground-oriented radiation tracking hypsograph. You can't make this stuff up. My cardiac cath lab project was with Dr. Charles Oliver, which was inspiring because I'd wait eagerly to present to him what I'd done over a week or 2 weeks, and then he would ask me, so why didn't you do it this way? And in most circumstances, that would be very debilitating, but he was such a machine language thinker and coder himself, it was inspiring. That's all I can say. Two short stories. I once decided I was going to decorate Mike McDonald's office. So I unrolled when he wasn't in a 5 by 7 foot wall hanging, and then I waited for him to come back. When he came back, he started making some very funny noises. And I walked around the corner and he said, "Did you do this?" And I said, "Yes, Mike, isn't it beautiful?" And he said, "What is it?" And I said, "It is every bit traced, flow charted in your double precision floating point routines." He said, "Why did you do that?" And I said, "I just wanted to see how you thought and moved bits." And he said, "That's an invasion of privacy." And I said, "So I've done the same thing to Floyd Nolly's Aztec. Do you think?" "No, no, Bill, just roll it up and burn that one too. Don't even tell Floyd about that." I got here yesterday and several people said, "So you're the guy that got his own Link computer one time." Oh, yeah. There was a sealed bid that was outside of Dr. Cox's office for a sealed bid, UCLA Linguistics Link 8. I tried to get a bunch of people at UCLA to do it with me. Nobody bid. So I got a banker locally, and he helped me. And when I was about to put the thing in the mail, I thought, I don't really know what I'm doing, so I'm going to drop the bid by 30%. And so 2 months later, I'm at UCLA with a check in the middle of the Angela Davis riots. I go to the linguistics lab. The guy in the front of the office said, "Professor, the man to get the computer is here." And 2 or 3 minutes later, this absolutely gigantic man, he's about 6'8", 6'9", name was Peter Latafogata. He weighed slightly less than 400 pounds. He comes squeezing through the door. He looks down at his assistant, he looks down at me, and then he starts telling his assistant, "This is not a man, this is a boy." I got very distracted with computers in medicine, and one day Dr. Cox took me aside and gently told me, "You have to complete your 2 years of clinical practice, your 2 clinical years, or otherwise no one will believe anything you want them to believe with your computer interests." He also had to sort me out a few times because I sort of played the edges, and so whenever he had to sort me out, never did he raise his voice, and never did he use a bad word, and I deserved both. The 2 projects that I can't tell you about, because time is running out, I hope that we'll gather again in 50 years and I can bloviate a little bit about them, but every CT scanner in the world can take axial images and transpose them to sagittals and coronals. I did that as a second-year resident in 1975, and it caused a big fuss. And then the other one, the last 13 or 14 years, I've been tracking virtual colonoscopy with CT. How do you take huge data sets with one breath hold on your back and one on your tummy, 800 images each, and analyze them quickly? Massive numbers of those kinds of life-saving cases, the choke point is not finding polyps, precancerous polyps, it's determining normality. And so if you have a speed reading breakthrough, which I claim I have, but we'll gather again in 50 years. I've got 5 international approved patents, and I just don't know where that's going to go, but that's, I thank all of you humbly for my BCL swagger, and I hope we can talk about some of this again in a few years. Thank you.
Okay, next on the program is someone from CSL, expert in computer graphics, worked a lot with macro modules. Bob Ellis.
I want to start by thanking all the people who did such hard work to make this possible. Do I get 5 more seconds now? As some of you know, I'm not unfamiliar with running large computer conferences, and so I know how much work it takes even to run a meeting as small as this one. A few years ago, I was thinking about my career, and it occurred to me that while the projects were great and interesting and fun, it was really the people that I worked with that was the most important and the most meaningful things to my life. As a matter of fact, you remember these strange little things that happen. To this day, I cannot use a Sharpie pen without thinking of Norm Kinch trying to ration them, because they were the only things that that would write on the link tape reels. So a few years ago, I bought a pack of 14 Sharpies, all different colors. So I figured I got Norm there. We all have lots of West stories, and any of us could stand up here for hours talking about them. I'll just relate my two favorite ones. First one was when I met him for lunch for a job interview in Lexington. We were living in Boston at the time. It had nothing to do with the link program and so on. And Wes described the link, which I knew a little bit about, and the macromodule project. I practically packed my bags right then and there and moved back to St. Louis. And it was a really unbelievable discussion and story. The other thing I remember about Wes is his style of project management. We would be working for several weeks on the functional design of macromodules. Wes would pay a visit to St. Louis, listen to what we had to say, and then say, about the size of a cigarette package, and then disappear for a few more weeks. It was an unorthodox style, but he got a lot of work out of us. It was really great. I have a good story about Garland Marshall. We worked a lot together, and I remember the day when I figured out that when we told Garland we couldn't do something, he knew the difference because of his what he knew about computers, to tell the difference between we couldn't do it and we just didn't want to do it. And I wish I had worked with more people like that in my career, people who understood what I did enough to have that level of input. Finally, there's Charlie. Those of you who know both of us, knew Charlie and know me, know that Bob Ellis and Charlie Molnar was not a marriage made in heaven. My style was to solve a problem good enough to get on to working to the next problem. And as you know, that was not Charlie's style at all. We finally got so frustrated, we took a classic Charlie park walk and really let each other know what we thought of them. I won't repeat the words, I remember them, but we ended up deciding that neither one of us was going to change and we better learn how to get along together. And I was just really happy when, in my job as external program project manager, research manager for Sun Microsystems, I was able to fund some of Charlie and Fred's work. So I guess Charlie and I kind of came full circle by then. I want to switch from the past to the future because to me, the future is more important than the past, as fun as the past is. A number of you know that my wife Margie has Alzheimer's disease and probably also frontotemporal lobe dementia. From my personal experience with this, my interactions with other family caregivers, and volunteer work with the Alzheimer's Association, I've come to realize just how big a problem this is. For example, there is an estimated 5 to 5.5 million people in the United States with some form of dementia, half of whom have not been diagnosed. The incidence at age 65 is 1 out of 6, 1 out of 8 people with some cognitive deficit symptoms. By age 85, it's between a third and a half of the people. We all know or can imagine the tremendous psychological and even physical costs on patients, family, caregivers, friends. But what you might not know is the financial cost. In the 40 years between 2010 and 2050, it's estimated that the total cost of care for dementia patients will be $20 trillion if a cure isn't found. $20 trillion is more than the current national debt. And so it's absolutely essential we find a cure. And the big need right now is to increase the NIH research budget for dementia research to a level commensurate with the size of the problem. And so I urge all of you, if you can help, contact members of Congress, people at NIH, whatever, although NIH is on board, and see if we can't push this along a bit. If you need more facts and figures, go to alz.org. Think of it as, well, it's not going to help us, probably not going to help our children, might help our grandchildren, but I sure hope it will help my 1-month-old great-granddaughter. So I really ask people to get into this particular fight. So this is slightly different, but that's my life and where I'm at right now. Thank you.
Those are great comments about Alzheimer's, Bob. The next speaker got his BS in Engineering Physics from Washington University, PhD from Berkeley, Professor of Computer Science and Engineering at SMU since 1974, but he had some time at the BCL area. That's David Matula.
It's a pleasure to be invited back. As he said, I arrived here in 1966, actually in January, joining the then applied math and computer science. I joined in 1966, the new applied math and computer science department here. And I appreciate all the eclectic background here, because before that I'd had a chance at Monsanto, where I learned how to program when I was an undergraduate at Washington University's engineering school, worked with even interpreting nuclear magnetic resonance data, worked with psychologists while I worked for the computer center at Berkeley. It paid better than being a teaching assistant. And even though I started in math and physics, I just didn't care for limits and the infinite. I liked finite systems. And computers are finite, but very messy finite. And when I came here, my area would best be described as algorithms, although like software in the early days, it wasn't understood by anybody. Algorithms were a word that was even hard to find a good definition of. And my interaction with the labs was the first summer I was supported by the Biomedical Computer Lab, the CSL, and I was able to do something I hadn't been able to do in 8 or 9 years of programming. And that was to think about what's really inside the machine, because we'd always been told by IBM or others, you know, how things would work. And particularly I was interested in the arithmetic. The 360 had a base 16 system, which was kind of even hidden in the early days, and it just didn't seem like it would do what it should have. We found some strange behaviors where you could put in two numbers that were different in, I forget if it was single precision or double precision. It would turn out there would be a number in between, and floating point was a mess. This was before the IEEE standard. So Wes Clark was saying I was a problem that summer, but I think it's because I had a chance to work on computer arithmetic. And if arithmetic isn't fundamental, what is? However, it's just something everybody assumes has been solved, although every new machine, every new chip needs a new computer. So I started my work on base conversion and computer arithmetic, and I've been in it ever since. Even though my background was in other fields in operations research, I've been to every IEEE meeting on computer arithmetic since 1969. There are 21 of them. And it's been a life of interest that basically started with research support here. I used to be ashamed, you know, I hadn't continued programming that much. But then I realized 9 years was more than a half-life of most programmers. And so getting interested in the theory of the machine and having a chance to work with people like this. And I did get back into influencing hardware. Being down in Dallas, I got called about 1989 by a new company forming named Cyrix. And they wanted somebody to help with a division routine. And I didn't know what I could be getting into, because if you remember, it was only about 4 years later that Intel had a little problem with division in the Pentium. I think they wrote off $500 million in their taxes with the error they had. But anyway, I was responsible for the division and square root procedures, and I suggested a new way of doing it, which fit with their small multiplier. And anyway, we built it, and there were just 9 of us, and I was a consultant, but not knowing hardware, but seeing something so different from what we were teaching in the department where I had been the chairman for a while. It wasn't breadboarding. In fact, the oscilloscope there was in the closet by 1990. What was done was all in on workstations with hardware description languages, but the procedures and algorithms behind it, you had to learn how to communicate, me being more of a discrete mathematician and algorithms person, with people who were talking about wires and registers. And, you know, if you talked about an adder being redundant, well, could be arbitrarily long, take the same amount of time. Well, that was a mathematician's view, but there were wires. So I would learn about these practical issues, and usually my second or third idea was accepted by the fellow I was working with. And we got a chip out. Cyrix was a company that was driven out of business by Intel. But for those people who were interested, I wasn't a founder, but I worked there the whole time as a consultant. And they were founded on $4 million, one investment, which, you know, you can think of, you could have done that in a garage with a few good people. And it was sold, being driven out of business for over $600 million, about 9 years later. And then I had another opportunity with one of the researchers I worked with. It was then National Semiconductor had bought part of Cyrix, and they were making a chip that they wanted to be very low power. And there were just two of us who designed the arithmetic unit, but it had to be fully x86 compatible because of the software that was out there. And this was the Geo chip, which later AMD took over when they bought the group. And it was actually chosen. It was a 1-watt processor, fully x86 compatible and very fast single precision. So my contribution was strange algorithms, redundancy, and all these things. And having a fellow, he didn't tell me, but he'd gotten a perfect score on the math exam. So apparently he could listen to me, but he knew how to design hardware. And so it was exciting to see this chip was still being sold 10 years later. And one of the real triumphs of it, it was chosen, even though the project didn't go as far as it could have, but it was chosen as the original chip in 2006, I think it was, for the One Laptop Per Child project, because it ran on 1 watt and at about 400, 500 megahertz, which at the time was pretty good. So I had a good opportunity, and I did get a chance. I always talked about writing a book, and so over the years, I'm still active as a professor. I did get one out. It hasn't sold much. It got a good review. But if anybody doesn't believe there's still a lot of work being done in arithmetic, there's proof of it, and you know, by a lot of people in the field. So I thank you for the opportunity, for support at that time, and for launching a career in an area that's a little bit niche, even though I've often had to say when I had SRC support, Semiconductor Research Corporation, to the people there, that rocket science starts here with the arithmetic unit, and you just can't assume it's always correct. Thank you.
The next speaker is an important player. We learned this morning that he was a member of the class that built the 4W2. He, I believe, wrote the first radiation treatment planning program. He's associate director at BCL. As many of you know, Jerry and Don Snyder were instrumental in developing algorithms for the CT scanner, and this individual was involved in arranging contracts with Picker. It's, of course, Bill Girth.
I had a very small part in assisting the committee in trying to chase down some elusive alumni of BCL and CSL. And as a part of that, I did a little internet research and some email activity, and even resorted to snail mail in a couple of cases. And I have two, I'm going to read some excerpts from a couple of emails from some of the folks that I did contact but could not be here for various reasons. So let me just read a couple of excerpts before a few final remarks. This one is from Theron Baird. And some of you old timers will remember Theron. He was a technician, worked in the shop, a lot under my supervision. And I issued him a personal invitation to come, and he says, "Thanks for the personal invitation, Bill. Unfortunately, I will not be able to attend. I've been following the online posts and enjoyed the trivia questions. Also keeping tabs on who will attend and how many people I remember. It has been a very long time since those days. I have fond memories of my days working as a student, wire wrapping." Anybody remember wire wrapping? And so forth. In particular, I remember the time that I reversed the polarity on Paul Hesser's wire wrap gun. so that it wound in the wrong direction. Unfortunately, he discovered it when you were checking on his progress for a project he was working on for you. I remember your comment that the practical jokes were bordering on the unfunny. I felt like crawling away and hiding somewhere. So I conclude from that that maybe I was a little too serious back in those days. And then he finishes, I wish you all and all my old colleagues the best and a wonderful reunion together. Sincerely, Theron Baird, Assistant Manager of Networking and Operations at the Olin Business School at Washington University. And then a second email, I'm going to read a few excerpts because there's quite a bit more there, but this is from Ken Krippner. Ken was a principal in Artronics, one of the commercial companies here, who built one of the commercial versions of the program console and then went on to build other instruments in radiation treatment planning. So this is from Ken. I sent him boy, it was tough tracking him down, but I got lucky. So he responded, Bill, long time no see. Yes, I was made aware of the reunion, but unfortunately we have out-of-city plans that prevent me from participating. It would be great to see you and the many friends from BCL and CSL those many years ago. Looking back from age 73, I must say it was a fast ride and lots of fun. The people I knew during my working years made it so. You should know that I count you as one of the most significant in my many experiences. Hope we get a chance to see each other sometime soon. Ken. So that was just a couple of them. I thought many of you will remember both Theron and Ken. And now on a personal note, after leaving the labs after 16 years of really exciting activity, I had an opportunity to be involved in the design and building of several large computer systems. And through all that, I reflected back on my time at the lab. And one thing that I remember about being at BCL and CSL and that wonderful group of people is the sense of purpose that I felt, and I think we all felt, the sense of contribution to others. And I was struck by the dean's remarks just at the beginning of this session, and when he said, do something that matters. And I really and truly feel that this group collectively did something that mattered, and that was really wonderful. After leaving the lab, I didn't just shut my mind on those experiences that I had during those 16 years. A lot of things I took with me, and many of them were not technical. Jerry, I must say that my association with you over those years meant a lot to me after I left the labs. Your approaches to people management and your approaches to problem solving and troubleshooting stood me in good stead for all those years, even to this day. And a lot of times when I was faced with a particularly nagging problem, and it could have been a personnel management problem or a technical problem, somehow I would always come back to what would Jerry do in this situation? And somehow, some way, across the miles, across the years, I would hear a little voice. And Jerry, the favorite Jerry Coxism that I remember and bailed me out of so many problems was, take out the last improvement.
Thanks, Bill. The next speaker is another BCL former member, Stan Garfield.
I didn't start out to be a computer scientist. I actually went off to school to be a journalist at Northwestern. While I was there, I took a course in computer programming, and I thought, hey, this is fun. like doing this better. So I left Northwestern after 1 year. I came to Washington U, where I could study computer science in the School of Engineering. That year was the last year that was 1973, that we had an intersession. In the month of January, there was no class, and you had to find something else to do. So I saw a notice on the bulletin board in the computing center that said, Introduction to Programming the Laboratory Computer course at Biomedical Computer Laboratory. I thought, that sounds like that would be a good thing to do in the month off, so I signed up for it. Came over to the lab, and I met Mike McDonald, who was the teacher, and I think I was the only one in the class who really knew anything about computers. So I did pretty well in it, and they took note of it. At the end, I asked him, hey, is it possible to get a summer job here at the lab? He said, well, it might be, it's difficult, but send a letter in, and we'll see. So I sent my letter in, and I was waiting expectantly, and one day I got a call from my dad. He said, there's a letter here from the Biomedical Computer Lab. Do you want me to open it? And I figured he had probably already opened it. So he then said, and they've offered you the job of summer employment as a technical assistant in the computer lab. That was like the greatest news I think I had received to that point in my life. I had a real good summer job as opposed to some of the ones I had had previously. So when I got there, my first job was working for Maynard in speech and hearing research. And Maynard met me the first day and handed me a Xerox article on something called the fast Fourier transform. He said, here, read this article and then write a program to do this. And I thought, well, how hard could that be? Well, it turned out to be pretty hard, especially if you had only an Artronix PC-12 with 8K of memory, no higher level language, no floating point capability. But I read that article many times and started working out what to do. And the first thing I realized I had to do was come up with a sine-cosine table, which the PC-12 was not capable of generating. So someone told me, oh, well, Mike McDonald has written a floating point simulator on the LINC, and you can generate the sine-cosine table on the LINC. So I then wrote the program in LINC, assembly language, and I called the floating point subroutines, and the program ran all night. I would start it up before I left, and came in the next day, I'd have my fingers crossed, and then the LINC tape would turn for a second. It would write out the table. As long as the thing didn't crash overnight, I was set. So the fast Fourier transform program worked. That was probably one of the more challenging programs I ever wrote. So I thank Maynard for giving me that challenge with my first assignment. So that was the first stage of my career at BCL was speech and hearing research, and not only with Maynard, but with Jim Miller. But then the next phase was with Gary Brandenberger and Barry Heeb working on the cardiac catheterization laboratory. And they asked me to write the program for that, and it was actually fairly straightforward because Gary had written the flowcharts in such detail that all I really had to do was take each detailed step and write some simple Fortran code, and that was not that much to it. But then later, there was a time where I had to compute the cardiac output, and Barry had written an algorithm of his own that involved adding up a series of approximations of rectangles under the area of the curve. And I looked at it and I thought, this looks like it should have a mathematical solution. And after a while, I pulled out my old calculus textbook, looked on the integral table on the inside cover, and sure enough, there was a simple integral that would compute the area under the curve. That was the only time that I ever applied calculus in my career as a computer programmer, but it came in handy. And then the third wave that I worked on was on operating systems. So we invented something called the BCL disk operating system that sort of took off from where Artronix had left off with their software. We got a hold of the source code for the compiler and all the utilities, and we started to develop that. I worked with Dana Sawyer on that, and that was the third stage. But during this time, I met a couple of other interesting folks. First of all, there was Regis Lagler. Regis was like a perennial student. He had come to get his second master's degree before moving on to get his MD, and he was working on things with me. But one of the things that I discovered is that he had been a football player. He had played football at Penn State. He was quite good. And we decided that we'd write a computer program to simulate a computer football game. And what we learned is it was very addictive. Every time we showed it to anybody, they would stay up all night playing it. And we thought, there may be some commercial potential in computerized games, and we should start a company to do that. But the only problem was, how are we going to sell a PC-12 to everyone who wants to play the game? So that didn't pan out as we should have followed it. And then there was Janet Johnson, my colleague across the hallway. Eventually we moved in together into one office. And we were always interested in the fact that we would try to teach this course, Introduction to Programming the Computer, to a bunch of doctors. I thought, in 2 days, we're going to teach them assembler language programming. That's an interesting challenge. What if we turn that around and we try to teach medicine to computer programmers in 2 days? So she and I came up with an actual agenda for that and posted that on the bulletin board about the introduction to medicine for computer scientists. And then the last thing I'd like to mention was Ross Hartz, who's no longer with us, but was a good colleague of mine at the lab. And I was interested in sharing knowledge, which is actually what I do now. The profession that I've been in for the last 17 years is called knowledge management, the sharing of what people know so that other people can take advantage of it and benefit from it. And there was a series of seminars that were held occasionally at the lab. And I asked Ross if he would be willing to put on one where he would talk about some of his experiences, but in the spirit of knowledge management, what you learn from things that maybe don't go as well is even more valuable than things that go well. So I asked him to talk about some experiences he had in developing an operating system. And so we called the talk Pitfalls in the Development of a Large Multi-User Operating System. And I think at the time maybe raised a few eyebrows. Why are we talking about pitfalls? In fact, Ross wanted to call it pratfalls in the development of operating systems. But he did deliver the talk, and that kind of was one of the early examples of knowledge sharing that sent me on my way to be a knowledge manager. And since then, that's what I've been doing for a long time. So my time here at the lab, worked with a lot of great people. I had some really good technical challenges, and that was probably my best technical era of my career, so I appreciate it.
So the next speaker is a physician with a master's degree in computer science from Washington University. He worked for 7 years with Digital Equipment Corporation, now is the chief scientist for global patient identifiers, and he was a BCL guy. It's been a long time, Barry Heeb.
I hope that each one of you, sometime in your life, has had the wonder of an experience that just put you on a new track into something that you really want to do but didn't know that you could do. That's what happened for me, and I'm here tonight to say thank you to specifically 4 people: Jerry Cox, Charlie Oliver, Gary Brandenburger, and Stan Garfield. I went through medical school and was headed into surgery, and then got subverted delightfully by computing, and have had a wonderful career of 35 years being a medical informaticist. When I started, I was clearly, as a physician, going back to get a master's degree in computer science, I was clearly 4 standard deviations from the mean, at least. But now, that's not unusual, and that's a good thing. But I just wanted to say thank you to all of you for making possible that kind of a story time and time and time again. And I hope that each one of you have had a comparable experience of some sort that has released you into something that has been wonderful. I have learned so many things from this, but one of the things I learned is never be afraid to tilt windmills. So my current windmill tilting is our little startup company has created a national healthcare identifier. And I hope that within a few years, each of you will have the option to choose whether or not to get one of these or many of these to manage 2 things. One, to make sure that every doctor that takes care of you knows exactly who you are and has your data and nobody else's. And the second, that you as a patient are empowered to manage the privacy of your clinical information. That is now possible. We need to do it. But thank you all very much.
The penultimate speaker this evening was instrumental in getting this whole idea started. The spark plug that got this idea going, and he's told me that it's really Jerry's daughter Nancy that really kicked in and has done most of the hard work. So I'd add my thanks to both of these individuals. He worked at BCL, but then came over to the other side and joined the Mallinckrodt Institute, working with Michael Terpagosian in those great early days when the PET scanner was being dreamed about and finally built. He's, of course, Nizar Milani.
So a lot of what I was going to say has already been said. So I have to now improvise. But there was one thing about BCL that has not been mentioned. I walked in that door as a hippie from Africa, and Jerry hired me. He still doesn't know why he hired me or what were the circumstances, but I got hired, and I got to work with some fantastic people. And imagine this guy with just a physics degree, no experience in electronics, no experience in logic design, no experience in computers, walking in there, copying those data master cards, day in, day out. That was my job. And then finally they promoted me, and I got to work with some fantastic people. What made BCL unique was the people in that group. Okay. You could walk in to any one of those offices, either it was Rex, Jim, Bill, or Don, and they'd say, I don't understand this logic circuit. They'll sit down and talk to you, and they'll teach you. You know, I couldn't find any better teachers than that. So all the stuff that I've done, I do owe my learning to BCL staff. Thank you guys for doing that. Appreciate it very much. And it's always this spirit of cooperation at BCL that's existed. If I needed some help, people would always jump in. So when this thing came about, Bob Greenfield jumped in and got us all that long list of people we gleaned them off the progress reports. Now, if anybody haven't seen the progress reports, they are online at the library. And Jerry was very, very good about writing a progress report every year. So we probably have the best history of BCL in those progress reports. And in that, we have every single person that worked there at BCL. And Bob Greenfield actually got about 600 people that actually worked through BCL at one time or the other in the lifetime of the BCL. So we were able to contact a lot of people. But when it came time to getting it all organized, Maury Pepper, where's Maury? Was instrumental in getting us the CSL list. Now, how did we get the CSL list? He's a pack rat. He kept all the phone books for CSL for all these years. Now, who would keep all phone books? Well, Maury Pepper. So he got those phone books out, and we contacted the CSL people. We were able to contact them. And Phil Berger jumped in and really helped us with finances, having run businesses and become a good businessman. He knew how to do it. Jerry jumped in and said, we need to get this thing off the road. So he said, I'm going to volunteer somewhere. I don't think Nancy had any choice in the volunteering in this. But I got to tell you, Nancy, without you, this would not have happened. And so I would like to vote by support from the group that we vote you as the honorary BCL-CSL alumni. So on that, thank you. Thank you, and thank you all. Again, in the spirit of BCL cooperation, a lot of you have contributed to support this event. And thank you for your donations. Thank you for your support. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. I hope I'm not taking too much away from you, Jerry. Thank you, and I'll let Jerry talk for the next 10 minutes. So, Gil, thank you.
Well, it's hard not to have an enormous amount of affection for the next person that I'm going to introduce. And I'll ask him to close the program. He's kind, gentle, rarely ruffled. He's wise, one of the wisest people I've ever known. He can see into the future with great clarity. He's the kind of guy that can tell you what technology is going to be like 2, 3, 4 years down the road. It's good to hang out with a guy like that who can say, you really ought to take this path, not that path, because here's the way it's going to be. I consider him to be a great colleague, a great friend. Certainly Washington University is a far better place because Jerry Cox came this way. Could I ask you all, those of you who are able, to just stand for a moment and salute this great guy.
Well, thank you very much for that round of applause. I feel that my talents have been exaggerated this evening, and I'd like to set the record straight on my talents. I feel I have 3 talents. I find it hard to get mad at anybody, so I think that is a good talent. I like to invent acronyms. Havoc, Aztec, most recent one, UPA, which is Order Placement Appliance. So there are a number of others, but those give you a flavor. And I think probably one of the important talents is I seem to be able to recognize other people's good ideas. So to give you a little sampling of that, I want to go through a list of other people's ideas that I've stolen at one time or another. Originally, Hal Davis, director of Central Institute for the Deaf, had this idea about evoked response audiometry, and Maynard and I went to work on that. Then there was a trip to Maynard, Massachusetts, which eventually led me to Lincoln Lab, and I met Wes and Charlie, and the link changed my life, and it was an idea that probably made one of the best steals of my life. So I'm very grateful to Wes and Charlie for that. Next, I want to mention Bill Powers and his idea about making an interactive radiation treatment planning system. So we went to town on that. Frank Starmer, who many of you don't know, but he was a good friend from Duke, had this idea that with computer memory getting bigger and bigger, that maybe it could be used in radiology for presenting images. So I stole that idea from Frank. He's still a little piqued about that. But then Gil came along to help make that a reality with the electronic radiology lab. Don Snyder, his idea about a filtered back projection was a great idea. Don and I worked together in one of the most pleasant series of Saturdays in my life on writing a paper about that. That was great. A Friday afternoon with Mike Phelps presented another idea that we were happy to work on at BCL. And then later on at Computer Science, my colleagues John Turner and Guru Parulkar presented an idea about computer chips for networking. And that was a neat idea. It led to a company, Growth Networks, that was improbable success. So I've got this other company now called Blendix, and their ideas that I stole there go all the way back to Charlie Molnar with Metastability and our product MetaAce, and to Mish and Severo and asynchronous networks, which are just like the big cables that you may have seen in one of the pictures that are connecting macro modules. But now they're used on a microscopic level at nanometers instead of feet. And we're hoping to be able to do that with our company. So I want to mention my wife, my late wife, Bobby, who was the love of my life and is in your program, the only lady in the pictures on the program, so I call your attention to that. She was charming and inspiring and a wonderful lady, and many of you knew her. And I want to mention her name because she was so important to us all in the family. I want to thank my kids for their support during the years since she's gone. They've made life able to be handled. Nancy, Jerry, and Randy are my wonderful kids that are all any parent could possibly ask for and more. And I want to thank the folks who have helped so much in putting this together. It was Nazar's idea and plan, and we were able to follow up, but the local committee did a lot of work, and already they've been mentioned, but I'm going to do it again. Bob Garfield, well, he's not local, but he did all of the original seed work and getting the names, and Phil and Maury and Gerald, and finally Nancy. I'm sure that it would not have happened as well as it did without Nancy. And so I'm so proud of her and I want to thank her very much. And we have some tokens of my esteem coming forward with regard to that, Nancy. So a big round for Nancy. So thank you all for coming, and it's been a great evening.